Hello and welcome to the show. We're going to today try to continue our conversation on the justice system. I'm privileged to have the Honorable Judge Joe Charter back with me today, and we're going to try to start off where we were and touch on some of the things that maybe we didn't get to talk about the last time he was here, and try to put that picture together for you. Although it's hard to touch everything right now, at least we could get people to look at it a different way, see a bigger picture, and maybe come up with a better understanding of how the system works and what we need to do with that. Welcome to the show, Judge Charter.
Thanks.
Last time we were talking, we kind of left off with education in prisons, but there's a model that you have provided for us, which is that slide 14, the local criminal justice resources?
Yeah, we wanted to talk about that because we left off last time with justice reinvestment. That's the third bullet point there, as far as a website that's really the raw data that if citizens are interested in that, you can go and ask for, well, I want to see recidivism rates for women in whatever, Eastern Oregon, and the data is there for you to pull from. There's also the Public Safety Coordinating Council. I'm a member of that council. I wanted to mention that in January, on January 23rd, at the 11:30 meeting at the Justice Building in the Jury Assembly Room, there's going to be a presentation on whether Jackson County needs a new jail and what's the process for that. And again, as we mentioned last time, it's surprising to me to learn that only 5% of inmates in the Jackson County Jail are there actually serving their sentences. The majority, 55% of them, are there pre-trial, awaiting their trial as to whether they are guilty of the crime charged or not. And then Oregon Knowledge Bank, there's good information on policing and correction programs. We've mentioned restorative justice as a model. Resolve in Medford has some of those programs where you sit down with the victim and the offender and work out an agreement as to restitution. Other resources are rightoncrime.com and coalitionforpublicsafety.org.
Okay, so when we go, the 5% is striking.
It is.
It's just, what? That's what I feel when I hear that. And I really don't want to go kind of pick at them building a new jail, but it's only 5% of the people are actually serving time. But we'll get back to that, because there's another piece that I want to talk to you about. And then we'll go back to how the public can get involved, and we'll touch on that again, because I'm pretty sure people want to know and want to be aware of how they can get this data, what kind of data is available, like you were telling us, and how they can probably affect what's going on in their community. Back to education in the prison system, or restorative justice. You were giving us some statistics, or some a survey that was saying that if you have this much education, you're more than likely going to be here 15 years from now, if you have this type of education. Can you just go over that with me one more time so I can kind of understand it?
Well, so the overall concept is that the criminal justice system needs to be data-driven, right? So that we talked about evidence-based programs, because we want to make a difference. We want to rehabilitate people. We want to have programs that we know work. So to do that, we have to be data-driven. We have to see if our programs are working. And for example, Jackson County has been a leader in drug courts. We have 2 drug courts that does make a difference. It's a very different kind of court. We now have a mental health court. There's a veterans court in Klamath Falls. It's tailored to these people's needs. And those are programs that are funded and are making a difference.
Okay. I'm a veteran, so I have to bring up the Veterans Court for Jackson County. I'm here. I'm just hoping that Jackson County will also get a Veterans Court. I know what Klamath went through to get theirs, and they did it on a shoestring. We have a huge veteran population here.
We do.
There should be a Veterans Court if at all possible. So let's move on to investment in prisons or education. We had some conversation about that. When we initially were talking about the system and where the system should go, how should it be built? Because I usually start when I'm talking about the justice system. Is the system just? What was it built for? I know that it wasn't it's not fair to those who are impoverished, and at some point it's not fair to those who are from different cultures and backgrounds. The system seems to attack certain groups of people and punish them more than others. So that's a concern of mine.
Maybe it would be useful to go to slide 6
Okay.
and look at, so what we've talked about, the criminalization of poverty. How did we get here, basically? And we could say, the war on crime in the 70s, the war on drugs. I think the statistics are 1 in 5, and again, there are 2 million people in prison in America. 1 in 5 of them are there for some drug crimes. Society is changing. Here in Oregon, we have first the decriminalization and then the legalization of marijuana. Recent legislation, possession of drug crimes are being reduced from felonies to misdemeanors. And so as a result of these causes, the war on crime, the war on drugs, I mean, you can just say, whenever you have a war on anything, it's going to be expensive, right? The war on terror, we know it's very expensive. So as a result of that, persons incarcerated up 7 times in about 30 years. Cost of prisons are up 10 times in the last 30 years. And all of these states over this period of time, because of reduced budgets for corrections, have increased fees. So you have a fee for a public defender. That you have a constitutional right to a public defender, but you eventually have to pay because there's a fee assessed for you. There'd be a fee assessed for probation services. More than 1,000 courts in 12 states use privatized probation services.
Okay, so I want to visit the war on drugs. I want to revisit that because it's changed over time. The war on drugs in the 80s, when there was a cocaine and crack epidemic in this country that started that war on drugs, and people with minimal amounts, first-time users, were getting these really harsh sentences that were destroying their lives. And now that we're in 2016, 17, there's a different drug that's actually wreaking havoc in our communities and across this nation. And now, instead of it being a crime, it's a health concern in the country. What happened?
Well, we can say that the system has created a disparate impact when we look back to sentences, for example, for powder cocaine versus crack cocaine. And that's an economic, social economic, as to who the users are and who is being impacted by that. Now we have a prescription drug epidemic, the opioid epidemic, which people are analogizing to HIV. It's a system-wide program or problem that we're having, and it needs a the society to look at it as this problem that people are dying. Working class people in this country are dying from and living lives of despair, and so they turn to prescription drugs, alcohol, and the mortality rate is increasing for those people.
Okay, so I'd be remiss if I didn't bring this up. So the cocaine, and you kind of touched on it, from rock cocaine to powder cocaine and the communities that involve, which rock cocaine was mainly the African American and brown communities, the poor communities who were given these seriously harsh punishments that kind of wiped out a whole generation because of that. And now, and the powder, which is the same substance but used by a different class of people, they got slapped on the back of the head, and a lot of times nothing happened. And now that the pharmaceutical industry is actually the providers that we know about of what's causing this epidemic, when you're talking about opioids and stuff.
Yes.
People aren't making that in their kitchen. They're not bringing that in from...
Again, the financial impact of, who benefits? It's Big Pharma who is, selling these prescription opioids in West Virginia, et cetera. But go ahead.
To our middle class and our upper middle class, that's where the addictions are happening with these type of drugs. So let's look at it like this. Let me just ask, okay? So now that the system has realized that what they did was wrong and really painful and hurtful for this society, as well as certain groups of this society, is there going to be like some kind of restorative thing to happen to those people since the 80s who have been getting all this pain and grief, to bring them up so both of these eras are the same?
Yeah, I mean, so my viewpoint, being a judge, working in the justice system, is that often courts see insolvable social programs. It's like, we have a drug problem. Let's drop all those people into court and let the judges sort it out. Well, I was trained in law. I didn't go to school for a sociology degree or a mental health degree, but we're really asking our justice system to grapple with these social problems. And it means that, for example, in health court, law enforcement has to team up with social worker caseworkers and health providers to, sit down at the table and go over the case. Is this defendant compliant with his drug testing? Is he in the right places where he should be and not in the bad places where he gets influenced to do bad things? It's a more intensive supervision of these people, but it does have results. And again, I've just read something recently that Speaker Ryan has said, 2017 was tax reform, 2018 is going to be criminal justice reform. So I think on both sides of the aisle, bipartisan, it's time to look at these issues to say, are we doing the things we intend to do, and can we do them better?
Okay, I'm just wondering, and then I'll move on. I'm just wondering if the rights that were, the criminalization and the rights that were taken away from those people who were addicted to drugs in the past 30 years, now that it's looked at as a health issue, are they also going to look at those people as health issues also, or are they going to still be criminals?
Well, it's changing. Societal change is slow, but this is part of the collateral consequences. If, to a ridiculous example, I'm from Michigan, there was a defendant named John Sinclair. He was basically in prison for many, many years for possession of, one cigarette of marijuana. That wouldn't happen today, certainly not in Oregon. But there are broken lives. There are these lives of desperation that are chronicled by it's called the Case Deaton study of, why is our middle class breaking down? It's both economic, and it's health issues, and it's mental health issues, because they don't see the better future that was promised to them.
Okay, so I understand a lot about mental health and health things because of my history. I do know that it can't be solved by one piece of the system. This has to be a big social input and concern where people in the community are also doing the right things for these people and being concerned about them rather than kicking them to the side or giving them to the jail systems
Right.
to deal with. So it's got to happen in society as a whole, in families, in communities. They that's where I think the answer is.
Yeah, I agree that, you talked about education. I was looking for the statistic that 11 states spent more on corrections in 2013 than on higher education. Another area we see this is with the homeless population. So at least locally, the focus has been, okay, we're going to exclude them from certain core downtown areas where the services are, where the free meals are at the churches, where or the shelters are. If we do that, we simply moving the problem to a different area of the city. And so then they have to expand these exclusionary zones. There are constitutional issues involved with that, but the problem is not going away by moving it to another place, basically.
All right, I know there's been stories of homeless and people with mental health in certain cities have one-way bus tickets somewhere else. That is just, I don't have words for that. But I do know that it's happening, and we do see people out there that really need our support and assistance that for some reason we're painting this picture of them where people just are afraid to do anything to help. Tragic again. You have slide number 3. Can you tell us a little bit about where you're going with slide number 3?
Well, when we started at the very beginning, we said, disparate racial impact arising out of places like Ferguson, Missouri, where, basically you had local courts trying to support local budgets by fines that were disparately impacting the minority races. So this is simply a bar chart that says, over this period of time of 10 years, the non-white motor vehicle stops statewide by race were increasing, and for whites, it's relatively going down. So we can look at this data and say, it really does have a different impact based on who you are.
Okay, because of that, there was a term that we've used before, which is implicit bias. I think slide 4 kind of addresses that. Can we take a look at slide 4, and can you take us through some of what that really means? Because people are backed off by some words.
Exactly.
So
racism can be a impactful, offensive word in of itself. I mean, nobody wants to be called a racist, but when we talk about implicit biases, we're talking about, deep-seated, unconscious stereotypes. And if we look at things systemically, it's sort of the conveyor belt analogy. If the system is set up so that minorities do less well than the predominant population, then, as a white person, I don't have to feel personally responsible. I didn't create the system, but I'm standing on the conveyor belt and I'm being progressed along because of who I am, whereas a minority person might be running against the conveyor belt. You think of, the airport, the people mover systems, they have to run against the system, the conveyor belt in the opposite direction to make any progress. So this simply lays out, different layers of racism. I can make choices that I don't express. That would be intrapersonal. Interpersonal is if I would say something offensive to you based on your race. And then institutional, things like mortgage redlining, or there was a study in April of this year that auto insurance rates were like 30% higher in minority neighborhoods, even though they had the same risk profile. And then systemically, it's all of these institutions interlocking, so that if you have segregated neighborhoods because of redlining, for example, that leads to poorer schools, lack of jobs, et cetera, and it just perpetuates this system. So when we step back and look systemically, we say, okay, what do we have to change, not just personally, but in our institutions, so there is better equal opportunity?
Okay, so on a systemic level, when I look at the system, I can see so much implicit bias in every part of the system. For that reason, my point of view is the system just wasn't built correct. That we need to build a system that is just not do a Band-Aid here or try to make this look good over here, when everything works together to perpetrate these injustices throughout the system. So is anybody even thinking like that, or is anybody looking at the system that way?
Yes, we talked at the top of the hour about some of those resources, the institutions that are involved in that. In part, it's ACLU bringing lawsuits against individual municipalities or states for driver's license suspensions. Again, Speaker Ryan has said 2018 is going to be the year for bipartisan criminal justice reform. We'll see, but it's also a reflection of, if we're going to build a better system, we have to be aware individually. We have to speak our opinions at these meetings where we're considering, for example, a local jail, a new local jail here in Jackson County, and just be involved and informed. How are you going to sum this up, Andy?
I don't know if I can sum it up. I don't know if I have enough knowledge. There is so much to consider. We need to find a place to start. There's got to be a starting place. There's got to be some awareness, some buy-in and responsibility, and some understanding, and just say it's wrong, and how do we do it?
And I would say also citizen involvement, because if we don't get involved, then nothing changes.
There was a piece that we had talked about earlier. Just let me take a second to remember what that was. I really want us to look at it again. But in the meantime,
I don't know how we are on time, but we also talked about models of justice. We laid those out on slide 11. That really, we now have a retributive justice system. This goes back 5,000 years to Hammurabi's code of an eye for an eye, that if you steal something, then your hand ought to be cut off. Well, hopefully we've evolved from that, but we still basically have that retributive justice system. There are other systems we could consider and adopt. For example, restorative justice, where making the victim whole is the major emphasis of the system, instead of punishing the offender. Because eventually the reality is these people have to come back into society. And when they do, are they branded forever as an outcast, or are they given the tools to come back into society and become productive tax-paying citizens?
okay, so it's as we try to find ways to improve our lot and the way that we deal with people and the outcomes that are happening with people. What programs do you think should be in place? Especially, let's start with within the criminal justice system. So instead of should there be training, should people get degrees, shouldn't they? Not should they, but shouldn't they be trained and be able to get degrees and then be able to use those once they exit the system? Once I've adjudicated everything, it's been adjudicated, I did everything, whatever I did what I was supposed, what society asked of me to do.
I served my time.
Yeah. Now I can't do anything because it's following me. And then I didn't learn anything different while I was serving my time. So where should we start?
Well, you know, as far as the court system, we have specialty courts. We've talked about people with mental health issues need to have those issues addressed in a court that is sensitive to those issues. Same with drug courts. We do have to look systemically. So when people come out in the justice reinvestment model, we talk about wraparound services. So that means you can't just dump someone out on the street without resources for jobs, housing first, jobs, drug and alcohol treatment if they need that, you know, the skills for going forward. So we have to realize that's very expensive if we want to rehabilitate people and bring them back into society.
Okay, we got just a couple of seconds left. Is there anything you'd like to wrap this show up with?
No, just again, we've talked about citizen involvement. So we had that last slide 14 of, you know, just websites. The Public Safety Coordinating Council is going to be talking about a new jail, justice reinvestment in Oregon. And so I'd be happy to be involved and answer questions that people have that are raised by this show, because we can't cover it all in one or two shows.
We are out of time. So thank you all for watching the show with us today. I hope you got as much out of it as I did. I'd like to thank all the volunteers for being here and helping us to put this on, Southern Oregon University, and all the people in the background who made sure that this could happen. Thank you, Judge Charter, and I'd like to thank Paisan's Bistro and Pizzeria for helping us out here today. Thank you all, and we will see you on the next show. I'm Andy Draper. See you next time.
Here he is flying in over the clouds of the Rogue Valley.